Next week, Thursday, Britain will vote on whether to stay in the European Union or to leave. And most polls now say it's goodbye to Europe. Now, the financial markets this week tanked as investors started to panic. Our own share market fell day after day. And if Britain does leave, who next? Holland? Denmark? The idea of one European government will be over. Now, earlier I spoke to Daniel Hannan in London, a British member of the European Parliament and Secretary-General of the Alliance of European Conservatives and Reformists. He's also campaigning for Britain to leave the EU. Daniel, it's a pleasure to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Always a pleasure, Andrew.
Now, what's your tip? Will Britain leave?
I'm the worst predictor of these things ever. You know, I think in their hearts, people long ago made up their minds that we'd be better off as an independent country. Not because we've got anything against trade and cooperation with our friends in Europe. I think that's going to happen whatever the outcome next week. But because we want to take back the power to make our own laws, to hire and fire our own lawmakers. And the only thing holding people back is, I suppose, that deep sense in all human beings that change is always potentially dangerous. And I really hope that people don't allow anxiety to overcome what they know in their conscience to be what they want to do, because I think that would be just a sad comment on how politics works.
Can you just start? I noticed that a huge increase, a big increase in support for the Leave European Union case has happened over the last 2-3 weeks. What do you put that down to?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, why has there been a swing, if there has been a swing to us, as the polls are showing? I think because people have gone from asking why to asking why not. I mean, we're the 5th biggest economy in the world. We have the 4th military budget. We're one of 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council. You know, we have the world's most widely learned language, the world's capital city. Why can't we make a go of running our own affairs, trading and cooperating with our friends on every continent, including Europe, but governing ourselves in the way that Australia or Canada or Japan or any other independent nation takes for granted? And once people start thinking of it in those terms, the arguments for the European Union start looking very flimsy.
How much of an impact has immigration made to this debate, do you think? And also with it, I guess, the increased security threat?
I mean, obviously, immigration is having an impact. I mean, the EU put a lot of resources into 2 projects. One was the Euro and one was the border-free area, the Schengen zone. Now, both of those have failed to survive the first crisis in good nick, right? Just as the debt crisis cruelly exposed what was wrong with the Euro, so this migration crisis has cruelly exposed what's wrong with having the border-free area. And I think there is a sense in Britain that, you know, we agreed to open our borders to Europe. Now Europe has opened its borders to the world, and that wasn't the original deal. What both of those issues really are about, though, is control. Right? I mean, very, very few people in Britain think that we should have 0 or tiny amounts of immigration. We've benefited over many years from controlled primary legal migration. And I think that's going to carry on whether or not we're in the European Union. What we're asking for is that we should be, it's rather like what John Howard said very successfully in your case, you know, we should be in charge of roughly who comes in and roughly in what numbers. And as long as we're in the EU, we don't have any such sense.
But the scare campaign, and your Prime Minister, David Cameron, another Conservative, is campaigning against leaving. They're saying that this will cost Britain money and trade. How much of a factor do you think that will be? I mean, we've seen this week a lot of stock market unrest, nervousness about this.
Well, I mean, look, stock markets don't like change of any kind. They don't like elections. I can pretty much guarantee you that there will be some fall in the stock exchange and some fall in the currency before polling day, and I can pretty much guarantee you that they will both recover the day after, regardless of the outcome, because that's just what always happens. But, well, of course David Cameron is going to say that there are bad consequences. I mean, he would say that. He's running the campaign to keep us in. But we've got to look at what's actually happened. I always think it's better to go with evidence than with supposition, right? He announced this referendum in January 2013. Since then, so in other words, since the markets have been aware of the possibility of Brexit, we've attracted more foreign direct investment into the UK than into the whole of the Eurozone put together. We've created more jobs here than in the whole of the rest of the EU combined, all 27 countries. So as a matter of observable fact, the possibility of Britain leaving the European Union is plainly not deterring the markets and the investors long term.
Sounds almost like you're tethered to a cripple. But Daniel, in a sense, this is part of a huge change in how we regard relationships between nations and internationalism and all that kind of stuff. It used to be after World War II that nationalism was a dirty word, that inherently you were going to be breeding racism, and that internationalism was the go. That was good. The UN, the EU, ASEAN, all that kind of stuff. But is nationalism, or I think you prefer the word localism, is that replacing this new idea that, well, old now, of the internationalism that's been trumpeted by the left?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, I don't think it's a new idea. I think you have to have enough community of identity within a country to make democracy feasible. You know, patriotism isn't a bad thing. It isn't a negative thing. It's what makes us recognise an obligation to the people around us. It's what makes us behave unselfishly. It's my patriotism, if you like, that makes me pay taxes to support people I've never met. It's my patriotism that makes me obey laws even when I think they're stupid laws. It's my patriotism that makes me accept an election result even when my party has lost. And the problem with the EU is very few people feel European in the same sense that somebody might feel Swedish or Hungarian or Portuguese. They're trying to build the institutions of statehood where there isn't really any underlying affinity or community of identity. If the EU were just a club of nations, if it were just a free trade area, if it were just like ASEAN or the UN or the other things you mentioned, no one would really have a problem with it. We wouldn't now be having this referendum. The problem is that the EU aspires to be a country called Europe, and one by one it has acquired the attributes of statehood: a parliament and a flag and a national anthem and a currency, external borders, foreign policy, foreign minister, president. That cannot be made to work where people don't feel that they have that sense of common citizenship. That's what it is that we're against. So we want to replace a relationship of being an entity within an emerging European superstate to one based on trade and cooperation with our friends and allies. They will remain our friends and allies, whatever. They're in our immediate neighbourhood. Whatever happens next week, of course we need to have close relations with the countries on our doorstep.
But that's precisely why one of the common attacks on your camp has been, well, you're racist, you know, you're fostering racism, you're fostering xenophobia. That would seem to me a part of this fear that, well, here we're going to get all these nationalists, you know, fighting or whatever and making life ugly for us.
Well, as you know better than most people, Andrew, calling you racist is what they do when they're losing the argument, and they sense that they're losing the argument on this, and so they try and discredit our motives, discredit our, you know, all these ludicrous arguments we've been getting, that if we leave it'll cause the Third World War, it'll cause, Donald Tusk said, the end of Western civilization, the Prime Minister said it'll make al-Baghdadi happy. You know, voters are not fools, right? People can see when they're being sold a pup, and they know that what we're talking about here is a slight change in our commercial and jurisdictional arrangements to take back a little bit of control. That we're not talking about, you know, walking away from anyone, or certainly not, you know, or leaving NATO or the councils of the world or the Council of Europe. We're still going to be an engaged country. We're still going to be a global nation. We always have been. But we're going to, I hope, restore those links of language and law and of custom and kinship and of habit and history that link us to more distant places. Very few people, in fact, I don't think anyone in Britain really feels that they're part of a cultural continuum in Europe that includes, you know, Bulgaria and Latvia, but that doesn't include Australia or India. That would be a bizarre proposition to most of us. Of course, our closest links are to English-speaking common law countries, the people who have helped us when we've most been in trouble, the people that we have these huge moral debts to. And the idea that we can just become a part of Europe, I just think it's never really had any legitimacy among the general population.
Daniel Hannan, thank you so much for taking time to speak to us.
Thank you, Andrew.